They said she passed in silence, but that wasn't true. She died holding a letter no one ever cared to read, until now. 100 years of dust, wind, and time had buried her story deep. But out here, the land doesn't forget. Neither does pain. And when the truth finally speaks, it does so through trembling hands and eyes that have seen too much. This time, someone was listening to It was late autumn in Dry Willow, a place the maps barely mention anymore. The wind had a way of speaking out here, low and long, like it remembered things people chose to forget. Dust moved across the open plains like it had a mind of its own, swirling past split-rail fences, broken wagon wheels, and the old church bell that hadn't rung in 50 years. The sun hung low, casting long, gold shadows across the tall grass. Tom didn't rush here. It crawled, thick with memory. The land was both cruel and beautiful. There were bones in the soil, animal, man, and secrets alike. Every sunrise came up quiet, like it was afraid to disturb whatever rested in the fields. Coyotes cried at night, and old oak trees leaned like they carried too many winters. Folks around here didn't talk much. They worked, they nodded, they kept their heads down. The past sat heavy on their shoulders, but no one dared shake it off. There was an old house standing crooked at the edge of the valley. Most called it cursed. It hadn't been lived in since before their grandfathers were born. Some said a woman once waited by its window until her last breath. Others said she was forgotten the moment she was buried. No marker, no name, just dust. But one thing was certain. The land hadn't let her go. And soon, neither would the man who came across her letter. Colt Ryland wasn't the kind of man folks talked about in town. Not because he wasn't known, but because he didn't give them much to say. He kept to himself, worked his land, fixed his own fences, and said little more than what was needed. 47 years old and weathered by sun, dust, and life, Colt had the kind of silence that spoke louder than most men shouting. He wasn't cold, just tired. Tired in that deep way a man gets when he's buried too many people and dreams to count. He'd been born right there on the same land he now ran alone. His father had died with a busted back and a broken spirit, his mother not long after. Colt never left Dry Willow. Maybe he should have. Maybe he still would. But something kept him rooted, like the cottonwoods out by the dry creek, scarred but standing. Most evenings, Colt rode the fence line out by the old fields, not because it needed checking, but because it gave him a reason to move, to breathe, to think. He didn't drink, didn't chase women, didn't go into town unless the feed store called. Folks called him a ghost, and maybe they were half right. He wasn't haunted, but something in him had gone quiet a long time ago. The kind of quiet that don't come from peace, but from pain you learn to live beside. And it was on one of those quiet evenings, with a low sun bleeding across the prairie sky, that Colt saw something that didn't belong. A corner of torn canvas peeking out from behind the collapsed barn wall. Dust-covered, weather-worn, and buried beneath it a box. The box was small, no bigger than a shoebox, and wrapped in leather that had long since dried and cracked like old skin. Colt knelt beside it, brushing away years of wind-blown dirt with calloused fingers. Something about it felt strange, not dangerous, just sad, like it had waited for someone. Maybe for him. He carried it back to the porch, set it down on the table next to his coffee cup, and stared at it long while before opening it. The air inside smelled of cedar and age, like it had been sealed away from time itself. Inside lay a folded letter, yellowed and soft, held together by a ribbon that had once been red but now looked the color of dried blood. Beneath it was a brooch, silver, tarnished, shaped like a bird in flight. Colt picked up the letter with careful hands, feeling a strange weight settle in his chest. The paper trembled slightly in the wind as he opened it, and the handwriting inside was neat but hurried, like someone had written it with shaking hands and little time. If anyone finds this, please read it aloud. I want the truth to live, even if I don't. My name was Mary Ellen Carr. I was not a witch. I did not steal. I did not lie. I was 17. I was in love, and I died because of it. Colt sat back in his chair, heart beating harder than it had in years. The name didn't ring a bell. No one in Dry Willow ever mentioned a Mary Ellen Carr. He read the lines again, slower this time. The paper shook in his grip. The sun was sinking behind the hills now, casting long shadows over the ranch. And for the first time in a long while, Colt didn't feel alone. He didn't know who she was, or why this letter had waited a century to be found. But something deep inside told him this mattered. Someone had to hear her story, and he would. Her name was Mary Ellen Carr, born in 1872, in the same valley where Colt now ran cattle. Back then, the town was younger, louder, more crowded with promise and dust. Her family came west from Missouri with a wagon full of furniture and a heart full of hope. Her father built the old house that now sat in ruins. Her mother taught school in the church basement. Mary was their only child, a soft-spoken girl with wide eyes and a stubborn streak. She loved to read, especially by the fireplace during thunderstorm nights. Folks used to say she talked to the wind, listened to the birds, and wore wildflowers in her braid. That kind of spirit didn't sit right with some. In those days, a girl with a voice was trouble. And Mary had one, even if it only came out in whispers and letters. The town saw her as odd, pretty, but peculiar. The kind of girl who might stir a man's heart and shake a woman's pride. When she turned 16, she fell for someone the town would never approve of. His name was Samuel Finch, son of a ranch hand and Apache blood on his mother's side. He wasn't welcome in church pews or town socials. But Mary didn't care. To her, Samuel was kind, honest, and free, in a way that made her feel safe. They met in secret, passed notes hidden inside books, kissed by the creek when no one was looking. It wasn't long before word got out. The preacher's wife claimed Mary had cursed her garden. A neighbor swore she saw Mary walking barefoot in the graveyard at night. Stories spread like wildfire. People didn't need proof, they only needed gossip. And in a town hungry for someone to blame, Mary became the name they whispered with fear and disgust. No one asked for her side. No one cared for the truth. And just like that, Mary Ellen Carr, once the daughter of promise, was marked for something she never did. Mary didn't fight the town's judgment, not because she agreed, but because she knew it wouldn't matter. The more she tried to explain, the more they twisted her words. Her father stopped speaking at town meetings. Her mother started skipping church. Their house, once filled with warmth and visitors, grew quiet. The silence hurt more than the stares. She still walked to the creek, alone now, where she and Samuel used to meet. The wildflowers she once wore in her hair were gone, replaced by a scarf pulled low over her head. Her letters, once playful and filled with poetry, turned into journal pages full of pain no one would ever read. Her hands trembled more, and her voice cracked when she spoke. Samuel had been sent away, forced to leave with his uncle's cattle drive up north. They said it was for the best, to avoid more trouble. But Mary knew the truth. They wanted him gone, just like they wanted her quiet. She waited every day by the window, hoping for a letter, a word, anything. Nothing came. Weeks passed, then months. One morning, someone painted the word "witch" across her family's barn in red clay. No one admitted to it. No one cleaned it. Her parents didn't speak of it, just carried on with their heads down, as if not acknowledging it might make it go away. But Mary couldn't ignore what was growing inside her. Not just the sadness, not just the fear. Something else. Something alive. Something she couldn't hide for long. By the time Mary began to show, the whispers turned into open scorn. The town didn't wait for answers. They already had their version of the truth, and it was ugly. They said she had been caught with a drifter, that she'd made potions in jars and buried bones beneath the cottonwoods, that her child was cursed before it was even born. The preacher spoke of her in sermons without using her name, calling her a warning for young women who stray from the light. The girls she grew up with wouldn't look her in the eye. The boys who once offered her smiles now laughed behind her back. Children were pulled away from her on the street. Mothers muttered prayers when she walked by. Her parents tried to protect her, but they were losing ground too. Her father's shop saw fewer customers. Her mother stopped getting asked to help at town events. They lived behind closed doors now, the curtains always drawn. At night, Mary could hear people throwing rocks at their windows, riding by on horseback just to shout slurs into the dark. She stopped going to town, stopped walking to the creek, stopped writing, Still, she kept the baby's blanket hidden under her pillow, a small square of blue cotton she had stitched herself, just in case. Just in case things got better. Just in case Samuel returned. Just in case there was still a future worth hoping for. But in Dry Willow, hope had a short life. And by the time winter came down from the mountains, the town's cruelty had frozen into something harder than ice. They didn't just want her gone. They wanted her erased. It happened slowly, like most tragedies do in small towns. One day, Mary didn't come out of the house. Then another. The windows stayed dark, and no smoke rose from the chimney. Her father had gone into town once, hat low, asking for medicine. The storekeeper said he was out. Everyone knew that was a lie. Then came the night of the storm. The wind screamed through Dry Willow, tearing shutters from homes and rattling the church steeple. But the Carr house, no lights burned. No one checked on them. Folks later claimed they didn't hear anything, but the midwife, old Mrs. Langley, said she heard a scream carried in the wind. A cry that didn't sound like any storm she'd ever known. By morning, the house was quiet again. The town pretended it was just another cold day. It wasn't. Mary's mother died first. The fever took her fast. Her father followed 2 days later. Mary, already weak, barely moved from her bed. She held the baby close, swaddled in that blue blanket, whispering lullabies that no one would ever hear. Some say the baby didn't make it through the night. Others say Mary was seen walking into the woods, child in arms, never to return. But what is known, what is written, is that she died alone in that old house, a letter in her hand, and a name no one spoke again. No marker was placed. No sermon was read. Just silence and time, until Colt found the letter. Colt sat on the porch long after the sun disappeared, the letter open in his lap, his coffee cold and forgotten. The wind had gone still, like even it was listening. He read her words again, slower this time, letting each line settle deep into him like dust into old floorboards. He didn't know why it hit him so hard. Maybe it was because no one ever listened to her. Maybe because, after all these years, the land still carried her pain. Or maybe because he'd known silence too, just a different kind. He looked toward the old house, the one folks called cursed. It didn't seem haunted now, just sad, like it was waiting for someone to care, waiting for someone to say her name out loud. Mary Ellen Carr. He whispered once, then again, louder, and something inside him shifted. She wasn't just a story anymore. She wasn't just a letter in a box. She was real, and she mattered. Colt had seen too many people buried without peace. He wasn't about to let it happen again, not even a century late. He folded the letter carefully, placed it back in a box, and held it like it was made of glass. His hands were rough, but tonight they moved gentle, like he was holding something holy. That night, he didn't sleep much. His mind stayed busy, playing out what he'd do, how he'd make this right. He didn't know her anything, but he felt it anyway. Because sometimes a man doesn't help because he's supposed to. He helps because his heart won't let him walk away. The next morning, Colt saddled his horse before sunrise. The letter stayed, tucked in his coat, close to his chest, as he rode out toward the old Carr house. The wind had picked up again, but it didn't feel cruel. It felt like company, like something was finally awake. He spent the day clearing the brush around the house, hauling away old boards, setting stones in a circle beneath the tree out back. The brooch he found in the box, still shaped like a bird in flight, he placed right in the center, nestled between two flat rocks. Then he built a cross. Not fancy, just clean, solid wood, straight and strong. He carved her name into it himself. Mary Ellen Carr, 1872 to 1889. Not forgotten. He read her letter aloud right there, voice steady, though his throat tightened more than once. He didn't rush it. Every word was hers. And when he finished, he stood in silence, hat over his heart, as if she were standing there with him. For the first time in 100 years, someone honored her. Not with pity, not with shame, but with truth. Colt didn't do it for praise. He didn't tell anyone, not yet. This wasn't about being seen. It was about her finally being seen. And for the first time in a long time, Colt felt like the land had let out a breath it had been holding for far too long. A few days later, word began to spread. It started at the feed store. Colt had asked about where Old Town records were kept. Then Mrs. Langley, the midwife's granddaughter, heard he'd placed a cross behind the car house. People got curious. Some drove out just to see what he'd done. Others shook their heads, called it nonsense, said it was best to leave the past buried. But not everyone turned away. A teacher from the local school brought her class to see the grave. She read Mary's letter to the children beneath the shade of the tree. A few of the older townsfolk remembered stories their grandparents had told, bits and pieces about a strange girl, a scandal, and silence. Now, with the letter, the pieces finally fit together. A few cried. Some prayed. One man apologized to no one in particular, just stood there, hat in hand, and said, "We were wrong." It didn't change the whole town. Some folks still muttered under their breath, rolled their eyes when her name came up. But others, especially the young, leaned in. They listened. They learned. 100 years too late, Mary Ellen Carr's truth was no longer hidden. And Colt, a man who never asked for much, had given her what the world denied her in life. A voice, and a little bit of justice. Colt returned to her grave one last time that fall. The sky was clear, and the wind was soft, just enough to move the tall grass in slow waves. He brought with him the final piece, a small tin box, sealed shut. Inside was the letter, the brooch, and a single blue scrap of fabric, the corner of a baby's blanket he'd found folded beneath the floorboards. He knelt at the cross, dug a small hole near the base, and placed the box gently into the earth. Then he covered it, patted the soil flat, and stood back. There were no speeches, no audience, just the sound of wind in the leaves and the creak of old branches swaying. Colt took off his hat, bowed his head, and whispered, "You're home now." As he walked away, a gust of wind picked up. It carried loose dust into the sky and lifted the dry grass around the grave like a ripple through time. For just a moment, it felt like the land sighed, like it, too, had been waiting for peace. And in the stillness that followed, Colt didn't feel the weight anymore. He felt something lighter, like forgiveness. Sometimes the dead don't ask for revenge. They just want to be remembered right. Mary Ellen Carr wasn't a witch. She wasn't a shame or a mistake. She was a young woman who loved deeply, and in the wrong time, that was enough to break her. But the truth outlived the lie, and in the end, one man's quiet heart gave her the dignity the world stole. Not all stories get happy endings, but some get justice, even if it takes 100 years. And if you're listening, really listening, you'll hear voices like hers, in the wind, everywhere,